Well, Birmingham City have put themselves in a fantastic position after that 2-1 victory at Rotherham United last weekend. They're now 8 points clear in the automatic promotion race in League One, with 2 games in hand on most as well. So they're in a fantastic position, and rightly heavily odds on for the title as well as automatic promotion. But what's really interesting, I think, is the race for second, if it becomes that, because each of the 4 teams that have a realistic chance of joining Birmingham City in the top 2 all have some question marks over them. Wycombe Wanderers, of course, very much the standout candidate, but they've had a managerial change. Mike Dodds comes with a great reputation from the Bellingham brothers and co, but he's of course, very much unproven as a number 1. So how will he adjust to that hot seat at Adams Park, despite his brilliant coaching reputation? I think there's a question mark there. You've got Wrexham. They've added firepower at top in Jay Rodriguez and Sam Smith, 2 fantastic signings, but can they find extra creativity in central areas, having relied heavily on their wing-backs and Elliot Lee so far this season? Then you've got Huddersfield, who find themselves in a really poor run of form, a bit of a losing streak for them, a bit like the one they suffered in September. So could that put pay to Michael Duff's side and their hopes of automatic promotion? And then there's Stockport County, who are on a brilliant 4-game winning streak at the moment, but are they a top 2 side? It's a big question. There's big questions for each of those 4 teams, and we're trying to answer them this evening here on EFL Debate. So that's what's to look forward to on this League One podcast. Yes, welcome along to EFL Debate. You can get subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify. That would do us an enormous favour. So if you could very kindly do that, that would be hugely appreciated. We've got a plethora of guests to join us this evening, but for now, we're joined by my co-host, James McClare, a Birmingham City fan. Produces some excellent content on Twitter and Threads, not just on Birmingham City, but on League One and the Championship in general. For those listening on Spotify, James with the 3 instead of the E _34 on Twitter. James, good evening.
Good evening, Gab. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you sort of picturing that automatic promotion race at the moment?
Well, I'm smiling because I think Blues are in the position that we all hoped that we'd be in at this point. I mean, we've definitely in the position we deserve to be in. I think we've been the best side by far. Maybe some would question that given the scorelines. We haven't put many teams away heavily, but in terms of control, in terms of dominance, especially in those big games, we've been absolutely excellent so far. So I think, as you said, we're definitely in the pole position. And then I find it really interesting with those teams, like you say, there's all got question marks over them. And just a few weeks ago, I think Huddersfield Town probably would have looked like the favourites to go and join Blues in that top 2 with the quality they've got in their squad. But now 3 defeats in a row for them, one of those 2 Blues, and now they're 15 points behind us, and we've got a game in hand on them as well as 2 on some of the other teams. So I think it can change so quickly. And it'll be very interesting who can stay their claim, really. I think the next couple of weeks could be really crucial.
Certainly could. Well, it's great that you mentioned Huddersfield there, because our first guest of the evening is Brady from the Still Smiling podcast. Good evening, Brady. I hope you're still smiling after 3 straight defeats, but 6 times in the last 10 games you've conceded the first goal. You're giving yourselves a mountain to climb in games at the moment, aren't you?
I am, yeah. 3 losses in a row, you probably wouldn't be still smiling after that, but I am, because I'm just such a lovely, happy person. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Obviously, the way we kind of came down last season and all the kind of negative with that, I think there's still a bit of hangover from that, and you can kind of see that with it's a difficult one because you talk about going behind, but we've actually come back in a few games, which I think if you flip back to this time last season when we were in the Championship, the team just wouldn't have the kind of mentality or whatever tangibles you want to call it to come back. But it still is that kind of brittleness, I think, really. You alluded to it in your earlier point about the losing run we went on earlier in the season. Then we went on a 16 unbeaten run. But I don't think we looked particularly great in some of those games. So It's a bit of a strange one because we're I'm sat here talking to you. We've got Reading at the weekend. 3 losses in a row. But I still don't think we've seen the best of Huddersfield this season, which is very odd to be in the playoff places and kind of say that. But, the room for error, if the aim, which is the aim from the owners, is automatics, I mean, you can't make any more errors, really, if you want to aim for that. So it's a really difficult one. I think they need to bounce back and all the kind of cliches you want to chuck in there. But this is a really crucial time in the season. And, I mean, injuries, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but Huddersfield Town have just had so many injuries, as every team does nowadays with the amount of games, but that's really hampered us.
Certainly has. I think 2 of those injuries are to have been at the back to Tom Lees and Nigel Longvik, and clearly that hasn't helped. And I'm just wondering that the balance seems a little bit off kilter in terms of that back 3 at the moment.
Yeah, it does. I don't think there's been really kind of a settled back line in some ways. There's either been people out of form or kind of injuries that you touch on. Nigel Longvik, I think, has shown that kind of ball playing ability that I think we really miss, particularly when you've got, Matty Pearson in there. And this is no disrespect for Matty Pearson, but he's not a ball playing centre back. He's your head it, kick it away, likes to scrap with any kind of attackers in that scenario. But it's just been very unsettled. We've sold Mikael Hellick to Oxford. I think that was a bit of an unusual one. Obviously it sounded like the player wanted to go, and do you want a player at your club who doesn't want to be there? I think that's kind of up for debate. But, Radino Bolka had a long injury layoff. He came in against Northampton, and he's a professional. He has looked good in town colours. He's been hampered by injury himself, but there's no real easy way to say this, but he was bullied by Tom Eaves for Northampton at the weekend. And it's just, I think there's been a lot of changes in there. Michael Duff's kind of alluded to that, but, there's a big debate about goalkeeper as well. Jacob Chapman, 24 years old, kind of his first proper season in terms of run of games. But the pressure is, we've got Lee Nichols, who was, Championship Team of the Year, I think in 2022, sat on the bench and he's returned from injury. So I think there's been a lot of chopping and changing in the back line, and you two will know yourself, like that just doesn't help really. It's been a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, certainly has. James, what have you made of Huddersfield Town? Have you been able to get a glimpse of them this season?
It's funny enough, I've actually watched quite a lot of Huddersfield clips, given that we've played them twice for my previews and things. Probably less than Brady, I mean, in terms of full 90s. But the bits that I have seen, I think a part of the issue you talked on there about the back line is, for me, there's a real clash of styles in terms of the squad. In terms of the front players seem like they're absolutely built for a more high octane pressing style. In terms of even the ones they've brought in, Dion Charles, Joe Taylor perhaps less so, but Callum Marshall, and the front of the team looks like it wants to be aggressive and push on. But then you really lack an athleticism and a lot of power really towards the back of the team. The likes of Longvik have brought that, but obviously he hasn't been available in enough games. And I think it showed in the game against Blues in terms of how often we were able to play that ball down the right-hand side early in the first half. There was just a complete lack of pace at the back. And then, especially with the goalkeeping as well, then you've got a side really who should be controlling games in terms of the quality that they've got compared to most teams in the division. And Jacob Chapman has definitely got a bit more ball playing ability. I mean, some of his passing has been really impressive. Then if you put Lee Nichols back in, he's not exactly the most accomplished goalkeeper with his feet. So then again, you're kind of stuck between 2 conundrums. What do you prioritise? And what I've found interesting with Huddersfield is it's almost like they take control of possession in most games because the other team are almost forfeiting it and they have the better quality. But when they've played the better sides, they've almost looked to get a goal early on and then completely look to be a counter-attacking team. And again, against Stockport, against Blues, against Wickham, they've definitely looked to almost prefer to play without the ball in those games. And it does make me wonder whether against the lesser teams in the division, so to speak, that they're only having the ball because those teams are forfeiting it, and Huddersfield are the team where the onus is on them to win.
Yeah, absolutely. Brady, you mentioned injuries there, and they've clearly been a huge factor. I'm also wondering whether I looked at the squad list at the start of the season, and it was about 40 players, or not far off that. And I'm just wondering, maybe when you've got so many players, you're having to juggle lots of different players. It requires a different kind of man management. Does that make it harder for Michael Duff, as well as the injuries which you mentioned, to actually settle on a clear starting 11? Because that's something he did really well, I thought, at Barnsley a couple of seasons ago. But maybe at Barnsley, the fact that he didn't have as many players meant in a way it was easier to settle on a clear identity in a way that maybe he's found more difficult at Huddersfield.
I think that's a really important point, Gab. Obviously we had you on for our kind of League One preview at the start of the season, and you made the point, which I think is still very relevant, which is this squad is big, but in terms of quality, I don't think the quality stretches as large as the team. And, again, kind of bringing into previous seasons, Huddersfield, they've been a club in a bit of transition, I think is the politest way to put it. But if you want to be a bit more frank, they've had 7 permanent managers in 2 and a bit years. And this squad is signings. We were looking at it the other day. There's signings from Darren Moore. There's signings from Andrew Brighton-Writer. There's signings from Mark Fotheringham. Do you remember him? So there's quite a few, there's quite a few. It's a very, there's a lot of players in there that have been signed by different managers for different styles. And I think you're seeing that. Yeah, of course, the injuries play a part. And, I don't think they've really been able to name a settled side, and we kind of talk on the injuries, and I'm sure you guys will have seen it. He's back in training this week, but I suppose the biggest point about the chaotic nature of Huddersfield squad is, I think it was around September time, David Kasumu, and kind of Stephen Chicken from We Are Terriers, he made the point he was probably the 6th choice midfielder in the club. He's been incredible, and he's been injured for quite a long time, and I think part of that losing streak is down to him not being available. So it just shows you how much kind of chopping and changing there's been. I'm sure we'll talk about the midfield, but when I look at that team and in terms of quality, I think you can kind of get tricked a little bit. James kind of made the point about the team off the ball. Michael Duff, when he was hired, he considered a really good team for terms of off the ball and the shape and stuff. But there's players in there. Ben Wiles, who we know has been good at this level in the past, he is, I suppose, from a stats point, he looks really good. But if you watch a full 90 minutes of him, he can be very do nothing for 80 minutes but score a goal, or a kind of very hit and miss. And they just don't have that kind of game-winning quality. And we saw in the game against Birmingham, Keshi Anderson, that goal, that's quality. And I just don't think there's many players in this Huddersfield side who are able to score something like that and win a game. And so it's a really tricky one. And I'm kind of interested to see how they come back from it. Duff in his presser today said he's been very frank with the squad, and it's kind of had a chat. And I think he comes across really well in his press conferences, and we'll see what happens. But as I say, it's a really crucial time.
Yeah, Brady, I've studied Michael Duff's work for the last 6-7 years now, and he's one of the best managers that I've studied in the EFL. I rate him extremely highly. So for me as a neutral, I'm very confident that with the right amount of time and the ability to get a bit of left-footed balance in the squad, the ability to play with proper wing-backs, Lasse Sorensen fit, David Kasumi fit in midfield, proper, centre forwards that you can really rely on up top, I'm very confident that he'll get it right. But I'm also mindful that this is a fan base where parts of it will be disappointed maybe with the level of performance, would have probably wanted a bit more in that regard, maybe getting a bit anxious about recent form. So to what extent is there a willingness among Terriers to really stick with the manager and stick with the kind of the project, if you want to use that word, and to what extent is there a kind of feeling in the fan base of we'd want a little bit more than this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I saw, and again, you guys all know just as well as me, I think taking the temperature online isn't always the best for this, but I was quite surprised, particularly after the Northampton game, to see a few calls for Duff to go. I kind of posted about it. I think that's ridiculous. I think you look at like you talked about how good he's been at this level, how the kind of circumstances he's had. Again, we'll talk about the injuries, but that's been a part of it. I just think it's silly. But again, the style of play, I think it's a classic. When they were on this unbeaten run, the amount of comments I saw about, how Duff's, he gets it, he's incredible, and then you lose 3 games in a row, and suddenly he's the worst person in the world. And he said that himself. So I think he needs time. It's probably an unpopular opinion, but I look at this squad, and the ownership has said the goal is automatic promotion. But I think you've got to think about if that happens. They don't look like a team for me that's ready for the championship. No. So I think that's the other thing you've got to consider. And yes, there's aims and we want to achieve that. But I almost wonder if, you look at how difficult this division can be to get out of, and Chef Wednesday and all those teams in the past. I almost wonder if a team, another season in League One might be the best thing for Town long term. Just there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of signings from several managers. There's a lot of people out of contract, and we talk about it all the time in football.
I was going to ask you about that, Brady. Out of contract players in the summer, I imagine there must be about 15 or 20 players out of contract, because there were so many under contract for this season. Surely this summer's the one where they're all expiring.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the big names for that are obviously Tom Lees, Matty Pearson, and Josh Koroma, but there's plenty more, like you say. And look, I think in football it's a cutthroat business, and maybe this shows my kind of more emotional side. But I think talking about that mentality, this is a team, prior to this season was losing a lot of games and putting in a lot of, not the best performances, and I think that knocks confidence. And you can see that in some of the players, which is completely understandable. When things don't go their way, their kind of heads drop and they don't look kind of motivated to get back. And I just think, as a side, Huddersfield, it's been pretty prior to this season, it's been pretty miserable supporting Huddersfield for the past 4 or 5 years. So, and I think that kind of has affected the squad. So that's exactly. You touched on it with the out of contract players. I almost wonder if a reset is needed, because it feels a bit of a stopgap to let's get promoted, let's go straight back up. Whereas actually, as I say, I wonder long term, a bit of a clear out, a bit of people who've been really good servants for the club, like Tom Lees. I think he's been fantastic for a free signing, but he looks like maybe his legs are starting to go, and we don't really play in a way that plays to his strengths at times. We can leave him quite isolated and in a foot race against more kind of quicker players. And, he's not the type of player to do that. He's much better at reading the game. So, yeah, I think reset, but look, I'd said when we spoke in August, Gab, I thought they'd finish 5th. That's where they are currently. I think they could do better than that. And obviously Joe Taylor's been injured, but he's going to come back. I think he's shown at this level that he can score goals. He's already scored in his debut.
Do you know when he's due back, Brady?
They've said 4 to 6 weeks. It was a bit of a strange one. I don't know if you saw this, but it's the only time I've ever seen it where they interviewed the injured player to kind of talk about how frustrating it is and make the point that it was not an injury he suffered in training with the club, but it was something they picked up unexpectedly. I've never seen that in football. Bit of an interesting one, but then Duff said, I think 4 to 6 weeks. So we'll kind of see. But, talking about the game on Saturday, our 3 strikers that are only fit are Freddie Ladapo, who's not got a look in, Callum Marshall, young lad from West Ham, who's done pretty well, I would say, and Dion Charles, who hasn't scored for the club yet. I know it's only been a few games. So, yeah, what a difference a few games makes.
Yeah, James, I wanted to ask you about that because I think Callum Marshall's a striker that had caught your eye. So do you think he's somebody who could maybe try and catch fire perhaps in the absence of Joe Taylor in the next 4 to 6 weeks?
I think he's definitely got, you can see the raw attributes are there with him in terms of his involvement in build-up play is excellent. He's brilliant at drifting to the right-hand side specifically. He's been brilliant in kind of dropping in there. And just sometimes when there's a bit of nothing really on, he can make something out of nothing. But obviously he's still very raw. He's a bit inexperienced. And maybe if Charles can pick up a bit of form, or if I think Radulovic has obviously been out of form for a while now, but if somebody else can start scoring a few more goals and picking up the mantle, maybe it'll kind of ease the pressure on him, and he could then maybe not be so relied on to try and make those things happen out of nothing, and maybe get himself in the box and try and leave the build up for other players sometimes. And I really like what they've got going on in terms of the forwards now with the different profiles. And you talked about culture there, Brady. And I think I don't want to keep referencing everything to Blues, but we've seen it as well with the amount of losses over the last 10 years or so. And then last season, that was so difficult, even in the darker periods, to try and turn that mentality around. And then just when everything's going well, you're on a 16-game unbeaten run, you bring in 2 strikers that you think are going to finally do the business. And then that blow to Joe Taylor must kind of knock the air out of the team a little bit in terms of he was the main man coming in. But I wouldn't write Huddersfield off at all, really, at the moment. In terms of Joe Taylor, we saw last season can just explode and score so many goals in such a short space of time. Charles, obviously, is not having the best season, but we know his pedigree at this level. And then even then, Ladapo, he said he hasn't got a look in, but I think he still could be a useful asset, even if it's just facilitating someone like Marshall or another striker to play off. And the goals from midfield as well. So even though Huddersfield haven't been the biggest scorers so far, I think it's only been 7 games where they've won by more than 1 goal. But I think that could definitely change at some point.
Well, let's hope that's the case. Brady, do you think Huddersfield are finishing in the top 6?
I think so, yeah. Without sounding too arrogant, that 16 unbeaten run, I don't think they played amazing throughout that. They just looked quite solid, and I'm not used to it. I'm not used to Huddersfield being I'm trying to think of this in an arrogant way. We have bigger resources than other teams in this division, and I think if you look at we love football and we love an underdog, but wage budgets come into it. I think we've got one of the bigger wage budgets, and that tends to count. So I'd be surprised if they dropped out of the top 6 at speaking to you now. I mean, we'll see what happens with this unbeaten run, but I do think they've got quality. And we've talked about how the squad, and maybe there's a lot of bodies, but I think James touched on it there. If you take away the doom and gloom and pessimism of being a Town fan for a second, I think most teams in this league would say you've got Joe Taylor, Dion Charles, Freddie Ladapo scored 18 goals in League One 2 years ago. Callum Marshall, a really exciting player from West Ham who has contributed, and I do really like the look of him. I think most teams would be, maybe apart from Blues, I think most teams would be pretty chuffed or struggle to kind of match that. So, yeah, I think they'll be in the top 6. Automatics looks like a bit of an ask now. I assumed Wycombe would maybe drop off, but they don't really like doing that. So, I think they're in the top 4 of teams, when they're on the day. So I think it'd take quite a lot to overhaul that. I hope that wasn't too arrogant.
No, not at all. Brady, thanks so much for your time, and keep up the great work on the Still Smiling podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers, Brady. Delighted to be joined now by James Richings from the Bucks Free Press, journalist for Wycombe Wanderers. Good evening, James. What a time to be talking about Wycombe Wanderers, second in the league, and flying high as well. But you've also, unusually for your situation, you've appointed a new manager. I know it's a sort of interesting situation for Mike Dodds to come into, isn't it? When the team's already been playing incredibly well and hitting these heights, and almost a little bit unnerving in a way, coming in as a sort of completely from the cold. But he does come with great reviews from people like Luke O'Nien, a former Wycombe Wanderers player who worked under him at Sunderland.
Yeah, it's a very unique position to be in. Dodds. We actually spoke to Dodds today for the first time since he got the job, and he said, the interest came about 10 days ago or so. He's had several meetings with the Wycombe hierarchy, and he was very impressed by the ownership model and the attitude of the players. That was a real big thing for him. And I think what's really interesting at this present moment in time is that when you see a new manager come in, they want to implement their style straight away. They want to show the rest of the league what they can do. But when you think about that, that's mainly for a side that's struggling to stay up or whatnot. Very rare to see that a side like Wycombe, sitting second in the table, appointing a new manager midway through the season, or well, more than midway through the season. Dodd said today in his first press conference that he won't be changing anything. He won't be changing anything at all. His verbatim, he said, if it's not broken, don't fix it, which I think is very, very refreshing to hear, because you get a lot of managers who come in mid-season and they want to rip up everything and start afresh. It wouldn't make sense in Wycombe's case, because of the season that they've had. They've only lost 4 games all season. And there were worries that after Bloomfield went at the start of January, that Wycombe could fall off. Sam Grace didn't lose a single game in charge. He took charge of 4 matches, won 2, drew 2. And you could easily say the game against Cambridge really should have been a win, because the red card that was given to Sonny Bradley completely changed the game, and that's now been rescinded. So it's a very unique position that Wycombe are in, and Mike Dodds just wants to steady the ship a bit. He wants to keep Wycombe on the path that they're on, and if it works, then Wycombe will be in the Championship next season.
Well, let's hope that's the case. James McClare, from your perspective, I'm just wondering, on the one hand, Mike Dodds has this brilliant coaching profile, right? He's worked at Sunderland, who've got this incredible academy, hugely respected there. You listen to, 2 of the best players in the world, Jude Bellingham and Luke O'Nien. They both speak extremely highly of Mike Dodds. But on the other hand, I'm slightly apprehensive maybe that you can be one of the best coaches in the world, but in the last 16, 17 games of a season, in a high stakes period, a lot of it's about managing players, being the number one, in-game management, getting a team over the line. There's a big, it's an interesting time, isn't it, to go for somebody whose whole shtick is coaching and not necessarily management.
100%. I think that was quite an interesting position for me, in terms of Wycombe was so adamant they're not going to sell Richard Cohen, and they're focusing on getting back to the Championship. But then they've almost gone for a more long-term appointment, in terms of Dodds has not really got much track record, but obviously has that coaching pedigree. I think Not the Top 20 spoke about it on their podcast, in terms of, like you said, he's got a brilliant coaching profile and he's worked with so many players, but maybe a more tactically astute number 2 could complement him quite well, in terms of, I didn't think Sunderland were that brilliant at the tail end of last season in terms of their tactical setup. I thought they were quite limited at points, and obviously switched systems a lot to try and find a winning formula. Only won 2 games out of the 13 that he took charge in at the back end of last season. But now's a very different scenario. As you said, the confidence will be high flying, and he doesn't want to change much, as James touched on. And he's got a recognised number 9 this time, whereas Jobe Bellingham was kind of playing as that one for Sunderland last season. I don't think it's, not to oversimplify the work of Wycombe so far this season, but I don't think Matt Bloomfield, obviously, it was rocket science in terms of setting Wycombe up in a 4-2-3-1. I think it suits the profiles in that squad. They've got a lot of attacking quality. I really like the additions they've brought in as well. And the fact that they haven't lost the game since Bloomfield's gone, I think really speaks to the character in that dressing room, that they're going to resist any kind of fall off at the moment, and they're going to show that they are right in this top 2 race. So definitely an interesting situation for him to come in, and he'll definitely be judged given what happened at the last time he took charge of Sunderland. But I think he'll be pleased with what he's coming into in terms of the character and the run that they're on.
James, on the one hand, it's don't reinvent the wheel, which makes perfect sense when the team is in such a fantastic position. But you have been willing to add to the squad with, I think it was 8 or 9 January editions, so certainly a busy month for the Chairboys. What have you made of the new faces coming in?
It's very exciting to see everyone. Really, I mean, I think overall Wycombe, I believe, made 12 new signings, 10 being double digits. It's incredible to think, and 10 of them being technically it's 14. 4 of them were academy players, right? So you look at it,
the B2 signings kind of thing.
But even so, 10 new players coming into the first team is huge for Wycombe. And it wasn't like they were just picking anyone at random. These players that were plucked were based on the analysis that they're using now as part of their recruitment system. They're very much looking at the data that led to Magnus Vestergaard joining for a club record fee. which is massive for Wickham, close to around £1 million, which is mental for a club like Wickham, who 11
you wouldn't
years
have done that under the Supporters Trust, would you?
Absolutely not. No. We're a world away from what we used to be all those years ago. And I think it's important to remember. And every time I come on your show, Gab, I always say the same thing. Wickham were on their knees 11 years ago, which still seems very recent. 2014, they were literally on the verge of going into the National League. Now they're signing players for around £1 million. Yeah. And they broke their transfer record twice in the space of about a week with Anders Hagelsgaard signing for about £500,000. His record then gets broken a few days later when Vestergaard joins. And you look at the other players from the Football League, they've signed the likes of James Berry, who is a proven goal scorer, Will Norris, who won the league last season with Portsmouth. Fine, not in the Football League, but you've got Alex Lowry. Rangers fans rave about him. So these are very, very exciting players. And how can I forget Adam Reach? And we all know what he can do.
Yeah,
all these players are now at Wickham Wanderers. It's honestly, fans are very much pinching themselves because this is very alien. It really, really is very alien to see the caliber of player that is now arriving at Adams Park, and a lot of it is down to the management. Bloomfield proved that with Wickham sitting top for numerous weeks during the autumn and winter months. He then goes, but the attitude the players have shown has really shone through because the players could have easily down tools and thought, well, we really bought into Bloomfield. We may not buy into who's coming now. They still haven't lost since he left. Right. And it's a lot more to than just talent. It's about the attitude the players have. So it's very much in Wickham's hands at the moment. 17 games left to be at 17 cup finals. If they keep doing what they're doing, they'll be absolutely fine, but there's a long way to go. And I won't lie to you, Monday was incredibly busy. Let's just say I'm still trying to recover from a 17-hour working day. It was very, very long.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly. But it's worth it for covering the club you love. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the midfield because you did mention a few additions there. A couple from Scandinavia, including Vestergaard, Alex Lowry coming in as well. And I felt from the highlights that I saw of the game at Cambridge, really good first half. I think second half, obviously the red card did make a difference, but I'm just wondering without Aaron Morley, and I felt this to an extent in the Northampton game that you drew 0-0 as well. You need somebody who can really look after the ball and has allow you to just manage games in different ways. Like Tariq Beckinson's a real athlete. Luke Leigh, I think he played left back last time out. He's a real scrapper, isn't he? With bags of energy. And then you've got the other lad, Josh Scowen, who another real terrier. But I'm just thinking, I think it's going to be really important that you can add that bit of control and creativity to midfield in the absence of Aaron Morley.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Aaron Morley, if you take away Richard Kone, Morley's probably been Wickham's best player this season. He's not even there anymore. That's how good he was. It was hoped he would return, but sadly, it never came to fruition, even though Wickham did try to re-sign him. But I think that's why they went with Vestergaard in the midfield. They're trying to get a player that's somewhat similar. And I think with Vestergaard, and Sam Grace made a very good point, Wickham signed him during their winter break. So he hadn't played for about, 6 weeks or so, give or take. So he's slowly but surely getting back into it. Same with Hagelsgaard. So the new recruits just need a bit of time to sort of blend in. But in the midfield, Wickham have got a plethora of options now. They really, really do. With Adam Reach signing, being on that left-hand side, he could potentially now play as a left winger, as a left wing potentially, which will then mean you have Luke Leigh who can now sit in the centre of the park, which is his more favoured position, and it just adds another layer in terms of options. Because you look at a player like Matt Butcher who was at Wickham, he did nothing wrong to get dropped out of the team, but the form of Morley meant he just couldn't get a game in, and in a way he could have been the replacement for Morley. But it was evident they want to try and level up on that by signing Vestergaard. So I think in the midfield, it has been a bit pickledy since the start of January, but you like to think with the new recruits, it's going to work now.
Can I just jump in on that, Gab?
Sure,
I think we're being obviously the signings definitely have been really impressive. What we spoke about. I think perhaps potentially we're sleeping on the biggest one. In I think that Javier Simmons coming from Hull. I think that is a really good addition for Wycombe. I think he's impressed me when he's played for Hull in that deeper number 6 role. And I do think he'll complement Scowen really nicely. I think, obviously, I'm pretty sure it's a loan deal. Is that right, James? To the end of the season?
It is. Yes, it's a loan deal to the end of the season with the obligation to buy if it all goes well.
But yeah, I think he could be a really interesting option in there. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's him and Scowen that initially established themselves as that pairing before. Is it Vestergaard, sorry, the midfielder, that he said, before he works himself back up to fitness. But yeah, I really like the Simmons addition towards the end of the window.
You know what's crazy, James, is that he was the last person to sign on deadline day, and I completely forgot about. I've completely.
That's what we caught up for in about £7 million bids for Richard Kona.
I know. Honestly, it's a brilliant signing. It really is. I know Hull have had a struggling season, really. And whatnot, when they've started to turn a corner. But for Wycombe to recruit a player like that is huge. It really is. It's been given a number 7 shirt, I believe, following David Wheeler's departure yesterday, which would indicate he's very much going to be starting, because you're not going to get the number 7 shirt and not be an integral part of the team. So yeah, I reckon it'll probably be him and Scowen, but then I reckon there will be rotation. Vestergaard, in my opinion, has to play. You can't spend £1 million and not play a player of his caliber. Backinson, he had a slow start to his Wycombe career. I don't mind saying that. I think Bloomfield even said that as well. Like, there were games he was just non-existent, which is why he's sort of been in and out the team. But he has really turned the corner in recent weeks. So it might be a bit harsh to see him suddenly get dropped. So these are good headaches for Mike Dodds now to choose from. And I think there's one thing we need to mention as well is the signing of Will Norris. Because I think it goes under the radar that Franco Ravazzoli, Wycombe's number 1 this season, he's played 51 games for Wycombe since he joined last season. He's only lost 9 times. And he's kept 20 clean sheets, I think. 21 clean. He's kept around 20 clean sheets in 51 games, only lost 9 times. And he could potentially be displaced. It's brutal, but Wycombe want to get promoted. They are so desperate to get promoted, and even if they do get promoted, it's not a case about all right then avoid relegation and championship. They want to be a sustainable and recognised championship side before making the big jump to the Premier League. That's the ultimate aim, and I've said it before. Wycombe, in my eyes, they're sort of replicating what Bournemouth did years ago. People forget. I know Bournemouth are touching distance now with Europe. But years ago, Bournemouth were on the verge of going out the Football League back in 2009 when they had that points deduction. 6 years later, or 7 years later, they're in the Premier League. Yeah. And now, they've beaten many of the big guns this season. So that's what Wycombe are trying to emulate. And hopefully...
James, this is an amazing point that you raise. I'm acutely aware that I've taken up a lot of your time, and I know you do have plans this evening. But one thing that really interests me off the back of what you've said there is, do you think that this kind of shows the fact that, for instance, Ravazzoli has been this unbelievable goalkeeper who saved you a point at Cambridge, and yet still might not keep his place? It shows a real ruthlessness and drive and ambition for the club. And I'm just wondering whether it's a kind of change of mentality from the club, because, for instance, the contract talks with Matt Bloomfield, maybe one of the reasons why Matt Bloomfield was raised in this culture at Wycombe Wanderers where it was all about loyalty, it was all about togetherness, it was all about people and sort of all coming together and believing in one another. And I think that it seems to me that the approach from the current board, Dan Rice, for instance, as chief football operator, it's actually more scientific, it's more calculated, it's more ruthless, it's more... if we can get to the next level of, we will do, which is a little bit of a cultural shift, perhaps, from historically what Wycombe Wanderers have built their success on.
Oh, very much. The direction of Wycombe Wanderers now has completely changed since the new owners have come in. And if you see a lot of successful clubs, doesn't matter if Premier League down to League Two, you have to have that ruthlessness in order to be successful. And it can come across as a bit brutal, but ultimately the club want to win games and they want to get promoted and they want to be the best. So they're not saying that the players who are there now haven't done a good enough job, because they have. The stats are there to prove it.
Yeah.
They're thinking, all right, but what's the next best thing after that? So with Ravazoli, if he does lose his place, in my opinion, I think it'll be incredibly harsh.
Yeah.
Incredibly harsh, because he has saved Wycombe a lot this season. The game that stands out in my mind was away at Wigan back in November. He made 3 incredible saves in the last 10 minutes, and it helped Wycombe win at Wigan for the first time ever. They'd never won at the DW before, and he played a massive part of that. And at full time, everyone ran to him because they know he helped Wycombe win. And we've already mentioned it with Matt Butcher. Last year, Matt Butcher scored the winning goal in the semi-final to send Wycombe into the EFL Trophy final for the first time. 12 months later, he's gone. He's out of Bristol Rovers. So it doesn't matter what you've done. The club will always be very, very grateful for your time, your services, and the things you've achieved. But it's like, right, we need to now try and progress. And that isn't to say the players haven't been good enough. They're just trying to find the next best thing. And with Wycombe now, it's all about the data. It's all about the analysis. And I think we're going to be seeing loads more players come through on that model, as we've seen with Vestergaard and Hagelsjaer. It's a very, very new way of being related to Wycombe, but it's very, very exciting. And the results have proven to be successful because Wycombe are currently second in the table.
They certainly are. Just got 2 more questions for you, but I'll ask you to keep. You can keep them short, because I do know that you've got plans this evening. First one would be a word on Richard Kone, just because we can't not talk about him. And second one is, will Wycombe Wanderers get top 2?
Oh, well, Richard Kone, what can I say? He's been fantastic. And I think what people don't realise is that he's so raw. Played non-league all his career, other than a couple of trials for EFL teams that they didn't go.
Lower echelons are non-league as well. Athletic Newham was 18 months ago. That was where he was at.
Which is incredible to think. And the way he plays, he's just like, I want the ball, I want to score, which is great, because that's the sort of playground sort of attitude that you need to have. And I said it before, at the start of the season, he said that his target was 15 goals. He's on 20 now. So every goal now is a bonus. He has been nothing short of exceptional. And he might go through a few spells where he doesn't score, make 3 or 4 games, but then he will make that up by scoring in the next 3 or 4 games. And the way he scores his goals is very, very good. His technique in bending the ball is fantastic. And the fact that Wycombe said no to Luton on 3 occasions for multi-million pounds show that Wycombe mean business. If this was a few years, if this 2 years ago, Wycombe let Anis Mehmeti go for about a million.
There's something like that, yeah. I mean, in a previous era, you wouldn't have got the £6 million bid, because it wouldn't have taken that. So I think that shows how far you've come, and just what a complete centre forward Richard Kone is, and he's absolutely lit up League One this season. So top 2, what are you thinking for your chances, James?
It's too early now. Yeah, I know it's too early to say. It really, really is. If Matt Bloomfield was still here, I would have said yes, 100%. That isn't to take anything away from what Mike Dodds has done. I haven't seen Dodds in action, so I can't give a judgment. But I think it's too close to give an opinion yet. So I'm going to sit on the fence. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll maybe come back to you after you've seen a few games under Mike Dodds, and maybe we'll have a clearer answer then. James, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Incredible work and coverage of Wycombe Wanderers on the Bucks Free Press. I commend your work for that, mate. And enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Nice to meet you, James.
Lovely to meet you too.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Delighted to be joined now by Matt Jones from the Racecourse Ramble. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. those additions of Sam Smith and Jay Rodriguez with, the drop-in form that we've just talked about with Huddersfield and Wycombe Wanderers having that transitional period with Mike Dodds and, the one or two uncertainties that kind of come around that, do Wrexham have an opportunity to use that firepower that's just come in as a means to propel yourselves a top 2 push?
Nice to see you both. I should start that way, shouldn't I? I guess it's awkward, Gab, isn't it? Because we'll have a transition as well because we've got 2 new players who've not been playing Parkinson style of football, shall we say. So we don't really know how they're going to adapt yet. So we can't just assume that they're going to hit the ground running and perhaps transform us. Sure. That's that's a balanced opinion of it. But it's going to give us a better chance, isn't it? Because if you looked at our strikers prior to them coming, we had Ollie Palmer who'd played and scored about 3 goals. Played nearly every game. I think he started every game for us, Gab. Kind of run him into the ground, and now probably finds himself a 6th odd choice striker. And Jack Marriott, who obviously was scoring, then got injured, and is now just coming back. And a Paul Mullin who's had missed 2 pre-seasons and not started firing yet. So they're better. We're probably in a better position than we were with 2 very exciting players, but. What's that adaptation going to look like? I'm not sure I'm articulating it well enough, but it's going to help us. It's going to give us more of a sniff, and it's exciting. I'm really excited by seeing especially I don't know about both of them actually. But Jay Rodriguez kind of got off my radar because I never in a month of Sundays dreamt we'd be sort of sniffing around anybody like that. In your division, you look at Sam Smith, you think that's probably an achievable signing for Wrexham, don't you?
Yeah.
But you don't think about taking a Jay Rodriguez. I know he's at the end of his career and stuff, but
he was starting for Burnley, Matt, as well. It's not like he was. Way down the pecking order. So.
No, I get that, but this is what I mean. I wasn't really looking up there, Gab. I never dreamt we'd be. So he's been off my radar for a long time. But they started really brightly the other day, so we'll see. I've answered that really longly, and I'm not sure I've answered it at all. But you get the idea, I think.
We like long answers on this podcast. James, coming to you. What do you put Wrexham in the automatic promotion conversation, given the general sort of state of play in that vicinity of the table?
100%. I think if I had to pick one right now, I think Wrexham probably would be my choice for second. I think there's just something about Wrexham where they just find a way, and even though their away form isn't competing with the other sides, I think they're so dominant at home. Even Blues, who have not lost at home yet, have got 6 less points than Wrexham at home, which just shows how dominant they are at the racecourse. I think the signings, short term, obviously, huge fan of Jay Rodriguez in terms of the quality in that squad. He's probably, in terms of pedigree, the best striker now in that squad. Yeah. But I did find it a bit of an interesting one. I remember saying when Sam Smith came in, this was kind of like an evolutionary signing for Wrexham in terms of he's got the physique and the style to be able to play in that Parkinson way. But obviously, compared to the others, I'd say he's probably a bit more rounded, a bit more accomplished, can do a little bit more of the build-up stuff. And then you sign Jay Rodriguez, who has definitely got that quality. But in terms of his legs and the stage of his career he's at, he's probably more of like the mould of strikers Wrexham have been going for in terms of Palmers and Fletchers. But yeah, short term, I think they're both great additions into the squad. I do think maybe there's a little bit of creativity issue, but I say that, and then on the game against Crawley, Ryan Barnett is still somehow managing to get to the byline, get crosses in. They might have double, triple up on him, but it somehow has still managed to be an effective way to create chances.
Can I chip in there before you go again, Gab? Just if you don't mind, sorry, just to sort of emphasize some of that. I think the interesting thing is, so I agree, James, entirely about the creativity. I've spoken before to Gab, and I've said my concern is we're a bit one-dimensional from a creativity point of view. It's get the wing backs deep and hit crosses from near the corner flags. And I think that that's not every goal, but you get the idea. That feels like that's our plan, if that makes sense. But obviously Barnett had been the shining light for us earlier on in the season. I think we spoke about that last time, Gab, didn't we? Saying, he's come from, I don't want to say he's come from nowhere, but you know what I mean? He's made really good adjustments coming up the leagues.
He's gone from being a low Barnet to a high Barnet.
Yeah, they're very clever. Yeah, that's why you get paid the big bucks.
It's not.
But the interesting thing is we've brought in Ryan Longman, right? And I appreciate that in a different system, he's played on the left side of a front three as an inverted forward or an inverted winger. But obviously, the games he's played for Wrexham so far, he's played on a right wing back because that's not our, we don't play anything like a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. So we obviously traditionally have played a wing back system. So he's played on the right. So Barnet has been a star and really, I think he's got 8-9 assists. But I think Longman is here to fight for that spot, which is I just don't think you play him on the left wing back, Gab. Instead of, I know you sort of drew breath then through your teeth, Gab. You're not going to play him left wing back though over James McLean, are you? Who's club captain. So
do you know what, Matt? I think whichever side Longman plays, because I think he can play either. I do quite like the idea of just having someone that keeps people honest, because sometimes you have this funny situation, Matt, where you have this brilliant, one of your best players. I think Ryan Barnett is that, and James McLean as well. Sometimes, if they're so obviously one of your best players, there can be this, and if there's no one else kind of keeping them, Anthony Ford got let go, didn't he?
Yeah.
If there's nobody quite near the
Put
level,
pressure on them.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of lose that little bit of edge. And I'm not saying Ryan Barnett would be the type of character to do that, but maybe subconsciously. So I just think the Ryan Longman signing, I quite like it, just to keep things fresh, keep things interesting. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I get that. I'm not, it's Parky obviously thinks that consistency and over the season, he needed that. So he's got the choice to mix it up. We've got multiple players on the left. Obviously, we've got McLean, Mendy, Revan, who can barely get a kick, who is obviously, has got decent pedigree. If you think about him last season, he had a really good, a relatively good season in a struggling side. Is that fairer to say rather than saying he had rather than he was making waves? So, he's got depth there now. The two right wing backs he had there before. Ford obviously had off the field issues with his partner, which are documented in our documentary. So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
She was very ill, and it seems the club have just said to him, "Sort that out. Don't care about us. Doesn't matter." So that was why he barely featured. And Luke Bolton came in and struggled to get a kick from Salford, if you might remember, we signed him. So we've added some depth there, but I would still love us. Elliot Lee gets run into the ground centrally as our main creator centrally, although he's been flogging a dead horse up front with Ollie Palmer for weeks, which is really weird.
Do you know what, Matt? What really confused me was before Rodriguez and Smith came in.
Yeah.
So certain away games, Phil Parkinson played, what was it, a 3-5-1-1?
Basically,
and I think if your style of football is very direct, get it to the wing backs, you stay high and wide and get crosses in, you're not going to maximise that if you don't play two up top. If you're going to play that style, I don't care if you're home, I don't care if you're away, you've got to play two up top, because that's how you get the best out of that way of playing.
And the worst thing is, sorry to shout, because I was getting excited. I was getting excited talking football. You see, this is the problem. So the worst thing is, Elliot Lee is one of those players. I can't give you a comparable Birmingham player, but he hunts the ball basically and goes after it. So he doesn't have that discipline to stay up front and try and stay within 10 or 15 yards of Ollie Palmer. So there's a good pair in there, so that when Palmer holds the ball up or brings it down, he's got a close pass. He goes off hunting the ball, and that basically makes it worse, doesn't it? Because it isolates Palmer then. So it was really weird, because Paul Mullin he's not going to be fit this season, right? He's missed 2 pre-seasons now, so he isn't going to be the Paul Mullin that we had at his peak. But he's been on the bench and not getting a kick, and it's just a bit like, well, why? What will Steve be thinking? Like Elliot Lee starting ahead of me in this forwardish position, and so it does make you wonder. But he dropped back against Crawley into that number, and he was, you can see him come to life straight away. But the problem is, he's our only what I call an attacking mid, a creative attacking mid. And that
Yeah.
if he gets a knock or a niggle or something, that could be a problem for us because, I would like us to have the option to create centrally or wide.
Well, that's the thing, Matt, because it's like, okay, so your first port of call is get the ball wide, get crosses in.
Yeah.
Great. But then it's the second phases where when the ball comes back, surely you're not going to say, right, we'll get it wide again and we'll get the cross in and we'll get it right. You want to actually have the option where when there's a second ball, okay, you've got Elliot Lee on the ball and he can slot something through. So that is a bit of a worry for me. You've got 7 strikers on your books and 1 attacking midfielder. Like,
I think. Listen, from what I understand, they tried very hard to get rid of some of the strikers, but because I don't know, for want of better words, because they're well remunerated, it was difficult to move 1 or 2 of them. So we are what we are, aren't we now?
Sure.
And I don't think Ollie Rathbone's done really well. Andy Cannon's back after a bit of illness, but they're not Elliot Lee type of players. You can't guarantee on them to get 5 to 10 goals between now and the end of the season. If Elliot Lee dropped out, they're going to get 2 to 5 goals, probably. And those can be the difference, can't they? These are the minute sort of levels that we're dealing with now. In talking, potentially squeaking into maybe the top 2 or maybe into the mix for the playoffs or not.
James, you're obviously fairly big on Wrexham, given that you'd sort of put them second at this stage. Who are the players that have sort of caught your eye? I mean, other than the ones we've mentioned, for me, it'd be the likes of Max Clearworth and George Dobson. So for you, from an outside perspective, who would you sort of pick out?
Yeah, I think Max Clearworth, obviously, he's got a lot of goals, which will probably catch the eye. But in terms of his defensive stuff, I think he's really, really solid. He obviously pushes down the line as well, which is what you need really when you're going to have the wing backs so high. You need those outside centre backs to be a bit more comfortable stepping in. I think Lewis Brunt has shown that as well on the left side, that he can do a bit of that. I like Ollie Rathbone. I think he's like a proper gritty, old school midfielder, isn't he?
Doesn't stop running, does he, James?
Yeah, definitely. You need those profiles. I think obviously Arthur Okonkwo is in a difficult spell at the moment, but we know his quality. He's still a very good goalkeeper. Yeah. And you mentioned Andy Cannon there as well. As much as he's not a creative type, I still think going forward he gives you a bit more than Dobson or Rathbone or James, just because of his drive and his ability to play in the channel a bit more. And then obviously Stephen Fletcher, at his age, I mean, it feels like when he was playing in the Premier League, he was basically about to hang up his boots, and he's still scoring goals, making the difference. He's won so many points for Wrexham. It's amazing.
He carried us over. I don't expect you to remember. I can't remember when we last spoke, actually, Gab. But he carried us over Christmas, really. He coming on and getting late goals. And then Ollie Rathbone had a spell where he was sort of stepped up to take the responsibility on. Forgive me if I've repeated this, because I don't know whether I've said this to you before.
I've repeated myself many times.
Well, yeah, I'm long in the tooth now. So I had a conversation with somebody. I think I put on Twitter, like, I wish he could last 90 minutes, basically, because he hasn't got 90 minutes in his legs anymore. You obviously won't see that because you probably don't watch 90 minutes of Wrexham, but he just can't. We did it against Shrewsbury because we had to, and let's not talk about that. But he basically he is now a 20 to 25 minute cameo. He's almost an unstoppable force. And I said, I wish he could play 90 minutes. And somebody very quickly replied back to me and said, if he could play 90 minutes, he wouldn't be at Wrexham. And that's the reality of it. If you think about how good he has been in his career and look at the impact he's had on us in League One, the chances are he would be he would be sniffing in around the middle of the Championship or something, isn't there? If he had that fitness level still, So, but he's been sensational as an impact sub.
Matt, I do want to bring in Russ from the Scarf Bagara War podcast on Stockport County in a minute, but I do have 2 more questions just to finish off. First one would be, and James touched on this earlier, Arthur Okonkwo. I was actually really surprised to see Okonkwo didn't start the 2-1 win at Crawley and Mark Howard did, because, Okonkwo is your big asset, the one you want to invest in. So even if he has a drop in form, you want to invest in him because he's the one that's got this incredible sort of long-term ceiling. So did that surprise you as a fan base?
Yeah, So on the podcast, he dropped. I don't want to say he dropped 2 clangers. We obviously lost to Stevenage, and there was a couple of goals that he would have normally, excuse me, normally he would have dealt with very comfortably, because shot stopping is his big asset, right? It's his outstanding asset. Everything else he needs a bit of work on, but his shot stopping is outstanding. And the 2 goals he conceded were down to his shot stopping. So I still said that.
You don't like his distribution, Matt?
No, Gab, he's not accurate with his distribution. And I think by design, Parky screams blue murder at him if he tries to do anything quick, especially short throws and stuff when we're not set in position.
Right.
So Parky, if try and counter attack, he's like Parky goes nuts.
Right.
No, he's not an accurate distributor at all. So he made those clangers, but I thought there's no way he'll drop him because that would knock his confidence. But what do I know? Because then, an hour before kickoff and it's Mark Howard's in goal. And Parky did publicly named him after the press conference and said, we gave him a rest because we think we brought him back from injury too soon. Because if you might not realise he'd been off with a bit of an injury for a little while. So he said he might have brought him back, but then he played him on Tuesday night. So I think that was a bit of classic protection, wasn't it? A bit of, a bit of saving face in dropping him. So we're all really interested to see now, like, what does he do against? It's Bolton's our next game next week. We'll see what he does against Bolton, because obviously he did play in the Virtue Trophy. Will he play in this round of the Virtue Trophy? Let's see.
So, Matt, predictions for Wrexham's season. You've been pretty coy about Wrexham's chances when you've come on here in the past. So, how are you feeling now with about a third of the season to go?
All right, it's just, yeah. The more times we come on, we're getting near the end of the season, and we're still in there, aren't we?
Yeah.
For people who don't know, I predicted we would finish outside of the playoffs. I thought the more experienced, hardened teams would obviously would sort of supersede us, really. Our away form is still an issue. I know we won on Saturday, but the performance wasn't great. And Parky promised some self-reflection, and he would pick a team that would work hard and fight. If you watch the game back, watch the extended highlights back, well, that wasn't what happened. Now, whether that was because we scored too early, I know, which is a weird thing to say, isn't it? But it does happen. We'll see. I'm more confident that we'll get in the playoffs, but I don't know whether it's the old school in me or what, Gab. But I'm not one that's picking us to be in the autos. I still think we'll miss out.
Yeah,
but I'm just hoping we can stay in the playoffs and get some.
I don't see that.
No, it's a big drop now, isn't it?
Yeah.
But away from Gab, we've got another 3 games away from home this month, and then Bolton come to the racecourse in March. So that's 3 or 4 games where you could pick up 6, 9, 12 points, or you could pick up 1 or 2 points, isn't it? When your away form is so patchy. So this is the month for us. I think we're going to find out this month.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks so much for your insight, and keep up the great stuff on the Racecourse Ramble.
Thank you both. Speak to you soon.
Cheers.
See ya.
So our final guest of the evening is Russ Johnson of the Scarf Bagara War podcast on Stockport County. Good evening, Russ. Thanks for waiting. Really appreciate your time this evening. 4 straight wins for the Hatters. Louis who?
Yeah, I mean, it's a month's gone by and people are still mentioning Louis Barry, aren't they? Look at him, he's left, he's gone now, he's at Hull. Leave it out. Yeah, he's gone. But some of the fans kind of predicted this, that Louis Barry, I wouldn't say hogged all the limelight or hogged the ball. Okay, 16 goals and a handful of assists probably suggest that, but it's kind of freed up everywhere else for us. We've got a like-for-like replacement in Hamilton now. He's that penetrator, sort of got the same... It's of the same ilk, if you like, same kind of player, obviously with slightly different skill sets. But yeah, Louis who? I mean, we're with 3 clean sheets on the bounce. Defence is doing terribly well without a Fraser Horsfall, which is worrying us. So we're full 4th and we're looking up, which is really, really pleasing.
Certainly is. One thing, I mean, when I looked at the 11 for the 1-0 victory at Leyton Orient, BBC had it listed as a 4-2-3-1, but I'm also wondering, because you could equally look at that same 11, you could equally line it up just as easily as a 3-5-2 when I kind of looked through all the players. So I'm wondering if there's that flexibility on the pitch, or whether it very much is a 4-2-3-1 that Dave Challinor plays.
No, it's very much a 5 at the back. But
it is 5 at the back, right?
Yeah, he starts with 5 at the back. So what we'll do at the moment, we've been playing Ibi Toure as left wing back, which is not his natural position. He's an out and out full back, so he struggles at left centre back, to be fair, and although hasn't done recently. So he's been playing wing back, and then we've had Noel, who's right centre back. He struggled in that position early on in when he first came. I think he's got used to that now. And then we've got Macaulay Southam-Hales, who's the sort of the marauding right wing back. So we definitely play that, but it's tipped to the right hand side. Macaulay Southam-Hales absolutely gets up and gets to the bylines. Even got himself a couple of goals this season. Ibi Toure pretty much doesn't as much as Maka. So with there's that sort of, it's definitely 5 at the back. He does and can do 4 at the back if he feels that the situation requires it. A lot less than 5 at the back, but that 5 at the back's working for us.
Certainly is. James, what have you made of Stockport County this season from an outside perspective?
I watched them on a few occasions. I watched the full 90 against Wrexham when they won at home, and what I've really liked about them is the adaptability, like talked about in terms of the 3 at the back sometimes, and then obviously in possession changing a little bit more, and the physicality and the control. I think that's been really impressive in terms of how varied their attacks are, with Wootton, who I really like up front, and now we've got Oluwafe up there as well. But then Will Collar as well, and Ollie Norwood, Lewis Bate, those more controlling presences as well. But yeah, I've really liked Stockport in that sense, and especially like you've said lately with Noyle and Southam-Hales, I think that could turn out to be a really interesting decision. I liked Rydell at left wing back earlier in the season. I thought he was combining really well with Barry as well. So there's definitely the elements there to make them push on. And it's only 9 points now, which a few weeks ago, I said this about Huddersfield in terms of people thought they were the closest challengers to Blues a few weeks ago. And a few weeks ago, people wouldn't have had Stockport probably in this conversation, but now they're right back in the mix.
Russ, who are the ones that have kind of stood out? Who are the players that have stood out to you in recent weeks?
I mean, James has just named them all, really. I mean, Wootton. I'll go through a few, but Wootton surprisingly gets a lot of stick from county fans that he's a bit of your old style centre forward sort of target man. There is a running joke, certainly on my podcast, and it's usually from me, that he spends about 70 minutes in a headlock because he's grappling with the centre halves and trying to get the best of them and things like that. But when you actually look at it and you sort of step back, he goes through so much work. He occupies defenders, maybe 2, definitely 1, sometimes 2. He's strong. He lays it off. He gets the odd goal. So the way that we play, it's kind of pitch perfect, really. The one that stands out. Lewis Bate is just brilliant. He will probably go from us if we don't go up this season. He'll probably get sold on, and that's always the model that we're going for now. So he's really, really good. At the start of the season, very much a player that when he received the ball, he was always looking towards our own goal. But now we've got Norwood. That mentality's kind of flipped now. Norwood takes control of that. You know what? But Norwood's like he can ping balls left and right, which is what he's been doing. Yeah. That's freed up Bate slightly, and he's looked really, really good since he's come back. Will Collar's an interesting one. Gab, you'll know Will Collar from National League and League Two. I'm not sure about you, James, but because you probably have been looking up more than down. He's one that's very much being a central midfielder, box to box, if you like. I interviewed him just at the start of this season. He said, no, I want to play further up front. That's what's happened. He's asked the gaffer, he must have given him that. So he's been in more attacking areas, and that's proving fruitful. So yeah, they're the ones for me, really. But probably the one that actually stands out the most for me is probably Norwood. You can tell he's been in the Premier League. Yeah, he just looks like he's got loads of time on the ball. He pings left and right. We've probably got Moxon in now to ease up on that because
interesting point. Yeah. See that.
Yeah, so Norwood. I don't think Norwood can play 90 week in, week out, Tuesday, Saturday. So that'll relieve him, and then obviously any injuries and and things of that nature. So yeah, I love pretty much them all at the moment. And we even, if your team's Birmingham, James, you'll know from playing you twice, we weren't too far behind you at St Andrews, and you got away with it at Edgeley Park. We were on top for the full second half. So, I think if we can keep injury free, keep them playing the way they are in this system that's done us well since the National League days, I think we could be there or thereabouts. I'm definitely on for a playoff spot.
Yeah, I think in the games against Blues, that the first game, obviously Will Collar hits the bar almost within the first 5 minutes, and then Blues kind of took control for the rest of the first half. But then the second half, he brings on Oluwafe, goes to 2 up front, and you had us under the cosh for about half an hour. We couldn't deal with the press, and then, like you said, at Edgeley Park, Alfie May has a brilliant chance to make it 2 for Blues pretty early, but then after that, again, Blues probably lucky in the end to hang on for the point, and I think that's probably one of our better earned points this season. I think what you mentioned about Will Collar, obviously he's been playing deeper previously in his career. I think him and Wootton are kind of an unlikely pairing, you'd say, to be in a side that are pushing for an automatic spot, but I think they work so well in terms of Wootton almost reminds me of Lyndon Dykes a bit in terms of he does all the off the ball, the stuff that perhaps goes a bit unnoticed. He's running of the channels, his out of possession work is absolutely fantastic. And then Collar with Southern Hales kind of pushing down the flank is allowed to tuck in a bit more, and almost he is playing quite centrally, even though he's off the right from the start. So those two, I think, really complemented Barry and perhaps made his numbers look better by the work that they did to aid him. So it'd be interesting to see if they kind of pick up the mantle in terms of numbers now, or if it's Hamilton or Oluwafe or someone else that kind of takes that role on. Yeah, definitely. Just one more player to pick out as well. County fans won't like me for saying this, but Ethan Pye, left-sided centre half. Yeah, because there's talk just from recent appearances and performances that he could play in the Premier League now. I'm not sure if that's a step too far at this point, but he's one that's come. I think we got him from Rochdale Youth, or some other youth, or maybe Oldham. Brought him into us, sent him out on loan to Gateshead. He's come back, and since he's come back and gone in by necessity, he's just the first name on the team sheet now, and he just looks so mature for his age and confident on the ball. Really, really strong in the air, and he's a left-sided centre half, and they're very rare, aren't they? So, yeah, exactly, and that's what we're thinking. We're thinking pound notes. If Barry's reportedly worth 10 million, then what could Pye be worth? Maybe 2 or 3, perhaps. He's one player to mention.
Certainly is. James, I think if you were to forge a case for Stockport County to even continue this form and even challenge the automatic promotion spots, it probably would be the fact that they've got Ollie Norwood in midfield, because as much as he is in the twilight years of his career, he's not been a footballer that's ever really relied on pace or athleticism. It's mainly been just this incredible ability with the ball, his in-game intelligence, his range of passing, his touch. All those things he's still going to have. So really, you've got a player that's won 3 promotions from the Championship with those qualities, playing in the central midfield in League One. He probably belongs above this level, and he can really be the heartbeat of the team in this last third of a season. Yeah, definitely. I think that is probably the biggest case, is the quality they've got technically. I mean, Lewis Bate as well, Russ talked on it, is probably technically way too good to be in this division. Obviously, he's had a bit of a difficult start before he's ended up at Stockport. And I think that is also what helps Norwood, is that Bate can be, as much as he's probably a different kind of player in terms of the Norwood's probably a bit better in the deeper areas of possession, and Bates probably a bit more progressive in the later thirds, is that they can ease the burden on each other to be that creative player. I think especially when you've just got one very technical midfield, that teams can often try and crowd them out and stop that the service from getting into the further forward areas. But when you've got Bate and Norwood, and then Moxon, as you said, coming in to kind of provide the legs as well, you've got a real nice balance there. And I think the variety really is what, if Stockport are going to keep this up and push them into a top 2 spot, is going to be how varied they are going forwards. They can knock it long, they can play short, they've got really nice combinations out wide, and the midfielders
perhaps could score a few more goals, but I suppose that's more they kind of sit a bit deeper on the outside the box to kind of retain possession and wave those attacks. So I think that is probably the strongest case for Stockport. Obviously, they're not in the top 3 for home or away form, but they're kind of consistent all across the board. In terms of fixtures, they beat Orient last time out, clean sheets lately. I don't know how many of the top sides you've got left to play, Russ. It's Wickham on the last day, isn't it? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we got Wrexham away as well.
Wrexham away. So, yeah.
Yeah.
A few difficult ones in there. But generally, I think that have you got a relatively nice run coming up? I'm pretty sure.
Next few are, but like you say, we've still got to play Huddersfield as well. So, So,
but yeah, looking at those next fixtures, there's Barnsley, then Bristol Rovers, Wigan, Northampton, Cambridge in there, Blackpool. There's definitely points on it to be had for Stockport. And given Wrexham and Wickham are kind of in a bit of a lull at the moment, then both dropped points a little bit. If Stockport can put a bit of momentum together, they could easily be 2 or 3 points off the automatic spots within a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
certainly could. Russ, I suppose it's interesting if we're sort of saying, obviously on the right-hand side, you mentioned Macaulay Southern Hales gets really far forward. I suppose if there was a question mark over Stockport County, and this is holding you to insanely high standards, it's probably a bit unfair for, given this remarkable journey that you've been on. You've probably not got like that super high class, high quality number 10, I wouldn't say. I think Will Collins is going to be a very good disruptive 10. I'm not sure he's going to bring loads of quality in the final third. And then as a left wing back, Ibu Toure used to be quite attacking. I think at this level, like you say, he's a bit more conservative. Whereas when Dave Challoner, brought up a Hartlepool side to League Two, he had like super attacking wing backs on either side in Jamie Sterry and David Ferguson. Whereas Toure's maybe not quite going to be like Ferguson was because he's a bit more conservative. So I'm sort of wondering whether there's going to be enough of a diversity of threats in terms of the final third, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, just coming to the left wing back first, I think James mentioned him, Ryan Rydell. I mean, he's come back from a long-term injury, same time frame as Maka. So he is a high pressing wing back, and his crosses are just a joy to behold. He crossed the ball to equalise against Birmingham in a bit of a cameo, and it was Maka at the other end. So it was 2 wing backs, goal and assist.
Oh, that's classic Challoner, isn't it? 2 wing backs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's. I think he's there. So you've got a mixture of Toure, Rydell, Maka, and Noyle on either side. That they'll swap and change. Hopefully, we can keep them all fit. You're right about the number 10, though. I mean that potentially is Collar, really. But like you say, you are talking about high standards now and a high class one. We probably need somewhere in that area if we're going to have a full, diversification of attacking threats. That's probably where we do miss out. That's not to say that we don't play through the middle. Barry tried it when he was here. He sort of flitted in the middle a bit. If you're going to put anybody there, I mean, you could put Nick Powell there. Okay, he's injured. He's coming back from injury. He's definitely a number 10.
Doesn't he operate a bit deeper nowadays, Russ? Or have I got that?
No, I mean, he has been. But I think, again, that's through necessity, through injuries. We've had a lot of injuries over the past, I don't know, it feels like 2 years or something. We've always had a high injury count. Nick Powell, for me, he's probably the best player at the club still, I would think. I've not seen Moxon yet. Norwood is great, but completely different type of player. Nick Powell, I think if he was in that number 10 position and we could keep him fit, I think that's as high class as we're going to get for that position. He sees things certainly mid-League One level, I would say, that other players just don't see, including our own. And there was a bit of them getting used to that. So I'd say Nick Powell would be that person. But you're right. If we've got ambitions of going up into the Championship and staying there, then we'd need something of Ollie Norwood's quality in that number 10, perhaps, to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sort of wondering, you've come such a long way in a short space of time. As much as we are talking about the promotion race, I also feel like, maybe one step at a time, it's kind of like you almost need to sort of cool off a little bit and, add in the summer. I'm sure Mark Stock's keen to invest, but you almost don't want it all to happen too quickly. So that there's an element of that I'm sort of conscious of.
Yeah, definitely, and we're conscious of that as well. Well, I certainly am. You know, we're into this 7-year plan. We've got 2.5 years to get to the championship. We're ahead of schedule now, being in 4th at this point in the season. So, but when you talk to Mark Stott, which I have, he's like, why can't we go for it? It's like, well, you know, we don't want to go too fast too soon. But yeah, I think he just put his money where his mouth is. So if you'd have asked me at the start of the season, which I think you probably did, 12th or above, I'd have been happy with. The fact that they're in the playoffs, I'm really pleased. Yeah, I don't know. Again, if we do go up by some, you know, I won't say miracle, but if we find ourselves in the championship next season, I think that Mark Stott will just invest but not blasé. I don't think he's reckless with it. We'll invest in good areas and
you're investing in the long term as well, which really excites
me. Absolutely.
You're investing in players that can grow with the club, which I think is brilliant. Well, Russ, I think it's a really exciting time still for Stockport County, and lots that's been achieved, lots that I'm sure you will go on to achieve under the current ownership. So, really exciting time, and it's been good to chat Hatters with you.
Yeah, cheers, Gab. Cheers, James.
Lovely. Thank you.
See you later.
So, James, we'll come on to Birmingham City and our sort of our bid for the treble in a moment. But in terms of the 4 contenders for realistically probably second, it seems a bit arrogant to call it that, but I think that's probably quite the likelihood. Is there anything from the 4 sets of fans that we've spoken to tonight that's kind of changed your perspective on any of those 4 teams?
Obviously, I picked Wrexham as my preferred choice, and I do definitely agree in terms of their creative struggles and the reliance on Elliot Lee. But this seems harsh to say, but I feel like it's Wrexham because it won't be anyone else. I think Mike Dodds obviously could hit the ground running, but it's a massive risk given what he's got little experience as a manager anyway, and obviously I still do have tactical concerns from the end of last season with Sunderland, considering what that squad's gone on to do this season anyway, with a lot of the still core elements that were there, and then Huddersfield, I still stand by the fact that I think they've a lot of the time got through games because they have superior quality. But I still think that there's another gear that they need to find if they're to compete. And Stockport, obviously, without Barry, it's a lot of star quality, and whether they'll have that match-winning ability in those big.
Do you know what, James? I think that's a very fair point, because as much as there is this argument that you take a star individual out, and all of a sudden other players take on more, and it's more of that. But I do. There is something in that, and the 4 straight wins, put some merit in that, but also I think they'll probably get to a stage of the season where actually they're missing that bit of individual brilliance that Louis Barry brought. So I think for Stockport and Huddersfield, I think top 2 is going to be difficult, and I would probably lean towards Wickham, actually, just from the conversation with James. Not that I don't see your point and share the reservation about Mike Dodds in terms of in-game management. However, the fact that he's not looking to change anything, and the fact that he's got Sam Grace on the touchline with him, who's already delivered 8 points from 4 games, I think that's probably a big plus. And so while I do have 1 or 2 reservations about whether Wickham will get over the line under Dodds, I think there's probably bigger question mark. Wickham Wanderers have proven it over the course of the season, and they're not really changing the template, whereas Wrexham, they've still got the away form to address. They've still got the central creativity issue to address. There's question marks about Wrexham that just make me wonder whether they're quite going to get the results they need to finish in the top 2, even with Sam Smith and Jay Rodriguez coming in.
Yeah, I think I definitely echo those concerns. And with Wickham, like you say, Sam Grace staying there is a big positive for me. Obviously, a bit of continuation from before. And I'm very happy I'm not writing Mike Dodds off at all. I think I'm very happy for him to go on a brilliant streak. And I think it's excellent what Wickham have been able to do so far, kind of keeping pace with Blues. I mean, Blues, I think, in terms of, you compare it to League 2, and Walsall are so far clear. And Blues are kind of unlucky in the sense that the quality of the other teams to keep pace with us has been so strong. But yeah, I just think Wrexham just have something about them, this ability to find the the match winning moments when it matters. Obviously, they do have to go away to Wycombe, away to Huddersfield, so those are concerns. And obviously, their away form is pretty much cause for concern. But I just have this feeling that Wrexham will end up doing it. And obviously, we saw with Oxford last season, obviously a bit of a different situation in terms of Des Buckingham came in and did change things from Liam Manning, but there can be a drop-off when a permanent manager comes in. Obviously, Sam Grace has done so well, but in terms of he's still a continuation of Matt Bloomfield, and it's kind of the eras haven't swapped over yet in terms of Mike Dodds now is a new phase of Wycombe. And as much as he isn't trying to change things, he's still a different manager to Matt Bloomfield. So I think it's a difficult situation for him to come in and take much credit in terms of a lot of people will say that the foundations were already there if he does go on to get them promoted. But yeah, I just lean towards Wrexham. There's just something about them. Even in the game at Blues, you always just feel like we almost wobbled and just crumbled in terms of our usual playing style at the racecourse. Obviously, we still were brilliant in grinding out, but they just have this way of stripping away the qualities of the other team when they're at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we were able to get a point at Wrexham, because that makes the gap 8 points with 2 games in hand on them, rather than 5 points where it might be a bit closer. So Blues, that 2-1 victory over Rotherham means we're unbeaten going back since November. That loss at Shrewsbury was the last one in the league. I'm just wondering, what did you make of the performance?
I was very disappointed we went in at half-time behind, because I actually thought that was our best home half of the season. I thought we were absolutely fantastic
Really?
at home. I thought in the first half we created plenty. The tempo was good. I thought we evaded the press well, and we really could have had a few goals if we'd put our chances away.
I thought we definitely created 4 or 5 good chances in that first half, but I saw it more as 4 or 5 isolated moments as opposed to being a really controlled first half performance, because Rotherham had their moments as well. And I felt like in terms of progressing the ball, I felt like with Taylor Gardner-Hickman got a club man of the match. They're clearly doing something right for people. But for me, Iwata was my man of the match. And I felt like we relied on him a little bit in possession because, and I think we spoke about it before the game, I sort of question whether, the way we play, that axis between Pike and Iwata is really important. And I just feel that with Gardner-Hickman and Iwata, you don't quite have that sort of enough of that sort of cultured side in possession that sort of facilitates our style. So for me, I think Mark Leonard, when he came in the second half, made a huge difference just because he offered that bit more creative support for Iwata.
Yeah, definitely. I know you're a massive fan of Leonard, and I think he showed it. I don't know if you've seen the goal from last night against Stevenage. It was a lovely ball over the top.
Oh, it was a great ball, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Gardner-Hickman's inclusion kind of is why I thought the half was so impressive in terms of it was different from Blues. It wasn't as controlled, and the possession wasn't as recycled as much as it has been in other games. But in terms of we adapted to the skill set of Gardner-Hickman a little bit, and we were a bit more punchy, I would say, going forward in terms of creating those chances and forcing way through. I think Lyndon Dykes lately, for me, has been absolutely phenomenal. I think he had a really good game again. Obviously got the assist for Stansfield and had that moment, didn't he, where he turned out of a bit of pressure and he could have played it back into Kesh Jansen, went for the shot. But I think that just shows his confidence at the moment. He's absolutely flying, and he's the physical capabilities that he showed in the Championship was what obviously he was signed for, the dual winning numbers and the headers, and he was right towards the top of those metrics, and we didn't really see that for many games. But he's certainly showing it at the moment. And I think a lot of players, that's what's been so impressive about us and kind of extended this run, is players like Laird, players like Dykes, players like Gardner-Hickman, and Leonard to a point. Obviously he's still sparse minutes for him, but perhaps in the first half of the season weren't key cogs and were kind of playing on the fringes. But since the new year, all those players have gone up tenfold in terms of their involvement in play, in terms of their output, their effect on games. And you can see that in terms of it's almost a headache now when Williamson, Paik, Hansen come back, and we've got so many options. Christian Bielik struggling to get back into the back four because Ethan Laird's been so good and Ben Davies has been so good.
Yeah. And you're not going to displace Clara because you could argue he's been the best player in the league, couldn't
Yeah.
you? Where was I? Yeah, so I'm really curious to see what happens with the situation up top, because you mentioned Lyndon Dykes and the physicality and aggression that he brings. You've got Alfie May, who's scored 20 plus goals at this level in the last 3 seasons and is on course to do it again. And you've got the £20 million striker. So it's a really interesting dilemma. And sometimes Chris Davies has sort of, dare I say, cheated his way around it a little bit by playing all 3 of them. But I don't know if the balance works necessarily with all 3 of them in the team. I think you've got to make some, unless it's in the second half and you're sort of just forcing the opposition back. But yeah, I'm not sure. I prefer a slightly more I would put Williamson in, I think, when he comes back.
Yeah, I think Dykes obviously is kind of filled in that role because of the loss of physicality with Williamson, even though he doesn't use his physical capabilities as much as he should. Williamson, I think I talked to you about it before. Chris Davies likes to balance the physical profile of the side, and I think Dykes is deputised well there. And then in terms of May and Stansfield, it's almost an impossible headache to have in terms of May is such a bagsman at this level, but Stansfield is your long-term asset and obviously has a lot of goals as well. And Stansfield playing on the inside left, I think it's been really difficult for him to find a way for those two. And I think that's also come from the fact that Emil Hansen and Scott Wright have kind of both had their injuries, and we haven't really had 2 out-and-out wingers that have been as impressive as Keshi Anderson has been on the other side. We haven't really had someone screaming out to play in that left depending on which side Keshi plays on the other flank. And I think lately with Keshi Anderson going back to the left, Ethan Laird's form allowing Kieran Dowell to kind of play on the inside right position, that will probably suit us better and see Stansfield lead the line more often with May
I want Stansfield to lead the line because I think that we've got to play him up top in the Championship. I think he can still show some quality and make contributions out wide in League One because he's that good at this level. But I don't think he's good enough to play out of position in the Championship and really have an impact. So I want him to play down the middle and just build that confidence up, try and get another 10 goals between now and the end of the season. And build that confidence up going into the probability of the championship football next season.
Yeah, I think with Jay, obviously there has been talk he's playing with an injury. Chris Davies said about he's got a bit of a back problem, and obviously I'm not a medical expert. I don't know the ins and outs and that, but if it gets to a point where we are guaranteed to be in the automatics, I wouldn't be surprised if he just requires surgery or something if he was taken out, and you kind of say, okay, we might be pushing on for the next 5, 6, 7 games, whatever, to try and get records, but Alfie May can deputise, and you kind of want Stansfield to have a full summer of recovery and come back into next season absolutely fit and firing. You don't want him to be still carrying any problems from this campaign. And I think, like you say, long term, he's going to be a striker. I think a lot of people clung on to the fact that when he initially come in, he did say he liked to play as a number 10, but I think that came from the loan spell at Exeter where he was kind of playing off Sam Nombe.
Yes.
So I think that was kind of the experience he'd had.
He was certainly more of a second striker, though, I think, at Exeter. It's not like he was a deeper
creative 10. Yeah. So I think long term, you can see the instincts in him in terms of ball striking, being a place Harry and defenders. Number 9 suits him. It's where he's going to play. He's not, even though he is a quick player, he's not lightning quick enough to play out wide in terms of you wouldn't say on the counter-attack you want him 1v1 with a player especially. And he's obviously not massively physical. So I think number 9 just suits him in terms of playing on the last shoulder where it's more short bursts over smaller distances.
Certainly is. Who are the other ones that kind of came out of that game against Rotherham from some credit for you?
Oh, I think Iwata, every time he plays, just amazes me that we got him for less than £1 million. I think it's absolutely ridiculous business, that. And Christophe Clara put Sam Nombe over the advertisement portal in the first half. I think he's just brilliant. Him and Ben Davies, I thought Ben Davies headed absolutely everything away that came at him. Yeah. Kieran Dowell had a brilliant home debut. I thought he was really clever with his play, I'd say, in terms of even the set pieces, he gives us a bit of a different option with the left footer, and obviously Cochrane's delivery has been great sometimes, but I do think he's not consistent enough with it potentially from those scenarios. And Kieran Dowell, we talked about him in terms of his availability issues, but he is quality-wise definitely a championship footballer at the very least. So I think he came out of it with a lot of credit. And then Anderson and Laird, it was so refreshing really at St Andrews, where teams have been so deep against us. And I know Rotherham tried to push on a little bit more, to have two wide players that were willing to run at their man, be direct and try and get balls in. And I think we really benefited from that in the first half particularly.
Yeah, I thought Laird was excellent in the first half, wasn't he? So yeah, hopefully he can have a really strong second half of the season and take that into next year. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. Really exciting times ahead for Blues, especially with into the semi-finals of the EFL Trophy and an FA Cup fourth round clash against Newcastle. What do you think to our chances in that one?
We talked about it yesterday, and I think that come 5 p.m. on Saturday, I'll be saying Blues going to win. Obviously, on paper, it's a free hit, absolutely not. But I have a funny feeling that we will at least make it a competitive contest. I think definitely. It will not be a walk in the park at all.
Because that's the thing, James. Like, I think our best 11 is a championship level standard 11, and I think Newcastle. You could argue that Newcastle's second 11, might not be a million miles above. So yeah, it is Premier League One against Premier League, but actually, I think depending on how much Newcastle rotate, because there are already in the League Cup final. I'm wondering whether we could give them a game, and maybe not another 5-1 like in 2007, but hopefully give them a game.
Definitely. And then that semi-final, as you mentioned, draw on Saturday morning. So I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone, but ideally we'd like Bradford or Peterborough at home rather than avoid Bolton or Wrexham if we could have our way.
Absolutely. So we'll have to see how that goes. James, a real pleasure to have you on as co-host, making your EFL debate debut this evening. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure, mate. Yeah, it's quality stuff. So everyone go follow James at James with a 3 instead of the E. Got to say that every time, haven't I?
Yeah. Should have picked an easier name, shouldn't I?
_34. So yeah, make sure you give James a follow because he produced some really good threads and analysis on the Championship and League One. Thanks to all our guests as well this evening. This has been the EFL Debate League One podcast. We'll see you again next week, but get subscribed to us on YouTube and Spotify in the meantime.